Well, I want to thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing this conversation about developing lay leadership. My name is Jim Honig. I serve as the pastor of Shepherd of the Bay Lutheran Church and ELCA congregation in Door County. And I hope that in this conversation that you will be able to take away a few things that you will be able to use in your own ministry setting. And I may occasionally sit down. 5 weeks from yesterday, I was gifted with a brand new shiny titanium knee joint. And here I am, the miracles of modern medicine. It's been amazing. So I may not want to stand for the entire time. But let's go ahead and get started. So I live in Door County, as I said, Ellison Bay, about 1.5 miles from Lake Michigan. I'm an early riser, and my routine most mornings is that I get up and I journal, I have my cup of coffee, and then I take our 2 dogs and I walk 1.25 miles to Rowley's Bay. Rowley's Bay is a little bay on Lake Michigan. It is a beautiful place. About 20 yards from the water is a rock that is perfect for sitting, and this is my view from the rock. And I don't spend a lot of time there. The dogs kind of sniff around. I just sit, and I sit in the quiet. I call it my moment of Zen. But as peaceful as the setting looks, it isn't always peaceful what's going on around me. To the right is a boat launch, and on weekends there may be as many as 6 or 8 boating rigs lined up waiting to get in the water. Behind me is Rowley's Bay Resort, and Rowley's Bay Resort used to be a place where tour buses would go, and so there would be 40 or 50 of the tourists waiting to get on the bus milling around. And last August, about half of Rowley's Bay Resort burned to the ground. Thank God no one was hurt. But for the next several months, when I would be sitting on my sitting rock, there would be a steady stream of gawkers wanting to come by on County Road ZZ to take a look at the burned out hulk of Rowley's Bay Resort. But no matter what was going on around me, this was my moment of calm in the midst of that chaos. So, I don't need to tell you that we live in chaotic times. The politics in our country is divisive. We live and serve in the church in an increasingly secular age where fewer and fewer people are interested in church. And if you are involved as a pastor or a lay leader in a congregation, you know that it's challenging times. Not all that long ago, congregations really didn't have to do that much to grow. They just needed to do their work faithfully and people would come. And it's just not that way anymore. Now, sometimes it seems like just a white-knuckled hanging on for survival. And yet, I believe there's hope. I believe that the local congregation is the incarnation of Christ, Christ in the world. Congregations who God has placed in their communities to be and share the love of Christ. Those congregations can thrive even in the midst of the current chaos. And one of the ways that helps us thrive in the midst of the chaos is to develop robust congregational cultures that are laser focused on mission, not on survival, but on mission. And to do that, developing healthy, strong, and capable leaders is essential. And so the next 50 minutes or so, what I'm going to hope to do is to provide you with some useful and practical, artful practices that you can develop in your setting that will help you to effectively develop lay leadership in your congregation. But I want to spend a few moments setting up a bit of a foundation from which I view developing congregational leadership. When we think of pastoral ministry, we often think of compartmentalizing the work. There's preaching and teaching and leading worship and administration and pastoral care, outreach ministry, and the list goes on and on. But developing leaders, as I see it, is not one of those compartments. It's something that you are doing when you do everything else. When you preach, when you teach, when you make pastoral calls, when you do your work of administration, all of it, you are developing pastoral leaders. You are doing it well, or you are doing it haphazardly. And I'm here to encourage you to do it well and to do it intentionally. You may remember that passage from Paul's letter to the Ephesians where he lists the leadership gifts of the church, and then he describes all of them as for the sake of equipping the saints for ministry. That's leadership. And so no matter what you are doing as you exercise your gifts, pastoral gifts or lay leadership gifts, you are doing it for the purpose of equipping the saints for ministry. As I said before, the church is the body of Christ. The work that the incarnate Christ began in his earthly ministry, he has now passed on to the church. We have been empowered by the Spirit to continue the work of bringing in God's kingdom. What wonderful and holy work that is. And remember when Jesus was commissioning his disciples before he ascended, he told them that when he had to leave, and that once he left, they would accomplish even greater things than he did. Boy, what an amazing promise that was. So I want to take just a few moments to step back and recall the work of Jesus. What was Jesus up to? When Jesus gathered his disciples, he was not doing the same thing that the rabbis of his day did, where they would gather a group of pupils and they would sit around and listen to the rabbi teach them. Jesus was doing something else. He was teaching them, yes, but he was also training them, sending them. Remember, they listened as he taught. They observed as he healed the sick. They broke bread together, and I can imagine that they talked around the dinner table in the evening. They spent daily life with each other, and they developed a relationship that was much more than master and pupil. And you probably remember in John 15, that great I am the vine, you are the branches chapter, where Jesus told them, I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends. Now, I spent a lot of time mentoring interns as a pastoral leader. And one of the training models that I use is kind of an old training model, very simple, but I think very effective. It comes in 4 steps. So first, I do and you watch. Second, I do and you help. Third, you do and I help. And fourth, you do, right? Which it seems to me, maybe that model actually started with Jesus. It was exactly what he was doing. As I said, he was doing more than teaching them. He was developing his disciples as leader. So he would do his work of teaching them and healing the sick and casting out the demons. And then remember what he did after that? He sent them out to do the same thing. So they have been watching, participating in his ministry, and then he sent them. And then they came back, and what happened? They talked about it. They debriefed. They talked about what went right and what went wrong. And so in the end, he left them bodily, but he continued to empower them to do their work. And then if you look at the early church in Acts, the same thing was happening over and over again with the disciples training other leaders so that the church could multiply, leaders multiplying, church multiplying, so that the work of the kingdom would expand and continue. So, maybe I don't need to convince you of the value of developing lay leadership, but I want to talk next about a particular perspective from which I come at the necessity of developing lay leadership in the congregation. What I'd like to turn now to is a deep commitment that I have about the nature of the church that comes from my understanding of the whole nature of the Christian faith. I'm coming at it from a deep commitment to a relational understanding of the church and therefore a relational understanding of leadership development. Now, when I graduated from the seminary about 100 years ago, I thought that my job as pastor was to take the knowledge that I had gained over 4 years and distribute that knowledge to the people that I was called to serve. I don't know, there might be a few of you that are old enough to remember those commercials in the 70s, the Shell Answer Man. If you're too young, look it up on YouTube, they're there. So the Shell Answer Man was the guy who would give all the answers about car repair and car maintenance. Well, I kind of felt like I was the religious version of the Shell Answer Man. I would provide everyone with the knowledge they needed for salvation and the knowledge and answers they would need to live as a Christian in the world. Now, I gradually came to a very different understanding of pastoral ministry, and as I said, a very different understanding of the church. It's rooted in the way I understand the Trinity. I understand the Trinity to be a dynamic, power-sharing, and love-sharing relationship with each other and with all of creation. I believe that what God prompted God to create the world in the very first place was that God needed an object for God's love. The love that was contained in that dynamic relationship of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit was so great that it needed an object for that love. And so God created the world, and God created the human family as the object of that love, and all of creation as the object of that love. And then God intended that for the humans to live in that same kind of reciprocal relationship of mutual love. And I think that's part of what it means to be created in God's image. And I believe also that the very reason that God sent Jesus into the world in human flesh was because the relationship had been broken. And God wanted that relationship to be repaired, to be restored. And all of that is relationship language. So, in my economy, the work of the church is to proclaim the good news of what God has done in Jesus in order to draw people into a relationship with God and into a new and different and mutual kingdom-reflected relationship with each other. And so, again, you dig into the Pauline letters, and you will see that in every letter that Paul talks about, he is dealing with relational issues among the congregations that he serves. And I could go on and on reading Bible passages, giving you references over and over, but let me just give you this one again from the letter to the Ephesians. Paul writes, "In Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ, for he is our peace. In his flesh, he has made both groups into one and has broken down the dividing wall, that is the hostility between us. He has abolished the law with its commandments and ordinances, so that he might create in himself one new humanity in the place of two, thus making peace and thus reconciling both groups to God in one body through the cross." That is all such rich relationship language. So, from that foundation now, let me move on to talk about what relational leadership development looks like. How does one go about it? Well, if there's going to be a relationship, you have to invest time to get to know people, to listen to people, to discover what makes them tick, to discover what their joys are, what keeps them awake at night, why they are even at your church in the first place. In short, you have to spend time one-on-one with people. Now, I don't know how many of you pastors, or if you are here as a lay leader, were trained to make that one-on-one relationship a priority in your ministry. I know that I was not. In fact, I remember in one of my seminary classes, and I think it was actually evangelism class, of all things, the professor was lifting up the ministry of administration and said at one point, if you are doing your work right, you will not have time to meet with the individuals in your congregation. That will be the work of the lay people. Well, perhaps there was no advice I got in the seminary that was more misguided. If the church is the relational gathering of God's people, then we are in relational work. Relationship building is the work of the church. Relationship building with God and with each other and with the folks in our community. So, the first of the arts and practices that I'm going to encourage you on is the one-on-one relational meeting. It's the secret sauce. A one-on-one relational meeting is a 30 to 45-minute conversation between two people in which they really try to get to know each other. The conversation is aimed at very quickly getting past superficial stuff to try to get at what makes people tick. So if I were going to grab one of you on one of the breaks and, have a one-on-one relational meeting, these are the kinds of questions that I might just jump right in with. Like, so why did you come to this conference today? Tell me about that. What's going on in your church or in your life that you thought something might be interesting or jog something here for you? You see, it's questions that get beyond talking about the grandkids and the weather to get very quickly at what at the heart of what makes people tick. Now, a one-on-one relational meeting is not an interview. It's not where I stand and sit and ask all the questions and you give all the answers. It's a conversation. So if I ask you, what brought you to this conference today, I might then also share, well, here's couple of the reasons why I was here and why I was really excited to be here. If I had the chance, a one-on-one relational meeting is full of curiosity. So you're always thinking about and listening to the responses that people give, and then wanting to go one step beyond that. So asking follow-up questions like, tell me more about that, or you sound pretty passionate about that. Where does that come from? Or where did that interest start for you? Or what concerns you the most about that? And here's one of the things that I think is secret, and if I can use the word magical, about one-on-one relational meetings. We live in a culture where so few people ever get heard. And when you don't get heard, you don't feel valued. A one-on-one relational meeting gives people the chance to really be heard, and when they are heard, they are valued. So, when I began my present call more than 7 years ago, I had been doing the kind of work of engaging in one-on-one relational meetings for about 10 years before that. And this was the first time that I had a chance to begin a call knowing what I know about the power of one-on-one relational meetings. So I told the call committee in the church council meeting that for the first 4 months of my time at Shepherd of the Bay, I wasn't going to do anything except Sunday morning and one-on-one relational meetings. And so in the first 4 months, I did about 125 one-on-one relational meetings with members of the congregation and about 35 more with the members of the community. And when I would do meetings with members of the community, I would end by saying, who else do I need to talk to? And so it gave me the opportunity to learn who were kind of the people in this community that I needed to talk to. So here's the kind of questions that I asked. So tell me how you ended up in Door County. Why did you come to Shepherd of the Bay, and why do you stay? What do you love most about this church? What do you find most meaningful about being a member of a church? Now, I wish I had some time to do some actual training today on how to do a one-on-one meeting, but alas, I don't. If you're interested, you can find some recordings of one-on-one trainings, one-on-one relational meetings on YouTube. And then there's a book written by a friend of mine, Dan Rhodes. There's a chapter in this book that has a really good written kind of rundown on how to do a one-on-one relational meeting. So, as I was doing those one-on-one relational meetings, I was always also on the lookout for people that I thought might have the gifts of leadership. So if you are going to develop lay leaders in the congregation, one of the things that is critical is that you always have an eagle eye on the lookout for leaders. And let me tell you what you probably already know, but I'm just going to say it outright because it's so important. The best congregational leaders are not always the usual suspects, right? They are not always the ones who have been on the church council for the last 20 years. What is a leader? A leader is someone who has the gifts of the Spirit. A leader is someone who is able to look at options and make decisions. A leader is someone who is able to act, and someone who is able to inspire others to act. Someone who others will follow. You cannot be a leader in the church if you have no passion for mission or ministry. In your one-on-one meetings, you are looking for people who are not just interested in something, but who are interested enough to do something about it. Now, maybe your church is different, but I'll tell you about my church. I have people in my church who are idea generators. They have all kind of ideas that they think somebody else should do. Those are not leaders, right? The leaders are the ones who are able to say, here's something that I think we should do, and I'm going to get 2 or 3 people together and we're going to do it. That's a leader. Let me tell you about Mickey. Mickey is one of our all-star council members, and if she were here today, she would be embarrassed for having me say that. She is now in her 3rd year of a possible 4 years, and she is just one of the best council leaders I have ever had. She is kind, she is thoughtful, she follows through. She always shares her thoughts and her opinions in a kind and gracious way, even when they go against the grain of the direction the conversation is going. When somebody needs to be done, she's the first one to say, I'll be there. Now, I asked her to join the council because of these kinds of reasons. She's in church every Sunday. She always shows a curiosity about what's going on in church. And beyond the curiosity, she always seemed to have sort of that keen observation. You know, when we had that potluck, here's something that I noticed. She also is someone who has that same kind of pulse taking on the community. She's a keen observer of what's going on in our small community. And she watches, she observes, and she cares. So you can imagine the conversation that I had with Mickey when I said, you know, Mickey, I would like you to pray about consider serving on council. And you know what she said, right? No way. I am not leadership material. I have never done anything like that before. And I said, Mickey, I'd like you to pray about it for a week or so, and I'm going to call you again in a week and we'll talk about it. Well, thank God and thank Mickey, she said yes. She is, as I said, one of our best council members. Now, I want to go the other direction too, to say that I have had some people in my congregation who are very smart, very talented, who I have loved and respected, but who I will not ask to be on a leadership team. Because to be on a leadership team, you have to be able to play well with others. People who are cantankerous, people who must have drama, people who are self-absorbed, or people who just like to have the title, those are not leaders. Those are people that I might ask to do a one-off thing, maybe even by themselves. But I'm not going to ask them to be on a leadership team because leadership in the congregation is too important to have folks like that who will derail things. I'm also an advocate for giving people short-term things to kind of test out their leadership. Now, when I asked Mickey to be on council, that was not the first thing that we asked her to do. We had been talking about getting a parish nurse started, and so I put together a task force. It was a 6-week task force, and their job was to research what it would mean to have a parish nurse, what their work would be, what the commitments of the congregation would be. And I witnessed Mickey on that task force being one of the best leaders, really bringing her gifts to the fore. So I want to move now to talking about how it is that we develop leaders among the leadership team. If you want to develop leaders and make them effective at tasks, you also have to pay attention to relationship in your work. One of my mentors decades ago said there is nothing so practical as a good theory. And he's the one who taught me about the task team development model of group dynamics. Now, I am vastly oversimplifying the model here. You can find much more depth about this on the internet. Along the bottom is this task axis. And groups are given tasks to do. And if you are on a church council or if you lead a church council, you know that we're really good at the task, right? We got an agenda, right? And the agenda has the list of tasks that we're supposed to get through. So we usually spend all our time on the tasks, but we rarely, in my experience, in church leadership groups, spend any time on the team building. What this model says is that if you want high-functioning teams, you have to pay attention to both the team or the relationship aspect of the work, and you have to pay attention to the task. Now, you can imagine teams that only pay attention to task. A lot of times that's our church councils, right? But when the going gets tough, there isn't the kind of relationship that holds people together. In fact, I have witnessed oftentimes when things go bad, the leadership team sort of fractures because there hasn't been the relationships developed. You can also imagine groups that only pay attention to the team. That's a lot of church small groups are like that, but that's okay. Church small groups are supposed to pay attention to the relationship. They aren't usually given tasks to do. What I'm here to say is that if we want high-functioning leadership teams who get things done, who really address the mission, we have to pay attention to both the task and the team. So, in our leadership teams, here are some 3 ways that we pay attention to the team, to the relationships. First of all, we begin our council meetings or our leadership meetings always with a devotion, and we share the leadership of the devotion. It doesn't always have to be the pastor that does that. In our church council, when we elect a new council, we send around a 12-month sign-up sheet, and each one of the council members signs up for a month. I do the first month, and I model it, and it's simply a prayer and a Bible passage where I talk about what the Bible passage means to me. Or, there are multiple books, and there's this thing called the internet where you can get all kinds of devotions off of that. One of my favorite ones, try this, and you will hear some of the most powerful expressions of people's faith. I ask the people to bring to the council meeting their favorite Bible verse or their favorite Bible story and to talk about why that's important to them. And I'll tell you, some of those testimonies have brought our council members to tears. They have been so moving. So we begin with the devotion, and then we move to what we talk about as the rounds question. The rounds question gets at something more personal. Here's some examples. What was your first job? Tell about the very first house that you remember living in. If you had a week to do anything you wanted and money was no object, what would you do with that time and why? Talk about a moment in history that is etched into your mind. I did this with a leadership team just not too long ago, and the one that first came into my mind was the explosion of the Challenger. And I remember exactly where I was at that moment in time. I was on my internship, and it was in the Washington, D.C. area, actually. And I walked into the office, and the church secretary said, "Did you hear what just happened?" And so we were mesmerized then. She had run home, got her TV and had it plugged in the office. That was before there were computers and internets where we could watch anything we wanted. But I remember that moment as if it's frozen in time. And it was really interesting to go around the room and to hear what those moments in history that are just crystallized in people's minds and where they were and what they were doing. Oh, and here's my favorite, one of my favorites too. I don't know, maybe I'm just too old, but did anybody else have to do show and tell in kindergarten? Yeah, that is a great one. Prep your council members beforehand and ask them to bring some object from their home that tells something about themselves. And then you go around and have each person do that. Again, I can't overstate the power of hearing some of those stories that people tell. I also think that it's imperative for leadership groups to spend more time with each other than just the monthly meetings. Schedule an annual retreat. I know it's a challenge, but do it. It doesn't have to be overnight, although overnight is of great value. And get out of your church, get out of your space. One of my favorite tricks is to call a neighboring pastor and ask if we can use their meeting space for a day on Saturday. It gets us out of our building and into their building. And usually the host congregation is just thrilled to even be asked. It doesn't cost you anything besides, right? And even if you don't do a leadership retreat, I would encourage you to make sure you have a time at least once a year when the leadership group can get together for a social time. For us, it's always in July. One of the council members hosts it in their home. There's always this thing about, is this just council members or is it council members and spouses? And we have decided that this is just for council members. That this is a time for us as leaders in the congregation to be together. Maybe there's another time when we invite spouses, but for this particular gathering, we have decided it's just us. I'm not saying you have to do that. That's what we have decided. I said there's three things that we do at the beginning of our meetings. And the third one brings me to my next point. The church is a learning community. Congregations are by definition learning communities. We gather around each week around the scriptures to learn about God, about God's ways, about our place in God's world, and how to live as God's people. But there is so much more for us to learn together, all for the sake of enhancing the work that we are called to do. Now, maybe you've done this too, but in the congregations that I've served, I don't know, it's probably not every year, once every other year or so, I always choose a book and we read that together as a congregation. I remember the powerful experience we had after the economic collapse of 2008. We read a book called The Soul of Money, and the author's name is escaping me right now. But it was an awesome chance for us as a congregation. In church, we're usually not very good about talking about money. But this gave us a launching point to actually talk about money and about the place of money in our lives and how we learned how to talk about money. And it was a powerful conversation. We had about, 10, 15 small groups that met in people's homes around this time to have conversations about money. It was a powerful experience as some of our people were really coming off of devastating consequences of that financial crash. Sometimes we'll read together a devotional booklet during the season of Lent. I live in Door County, as I already said. Door County, you may or may not know, has the highest median age in the state of Wisconsin, and our congregation reflects that demographic. There was a book that came out, 4 or 5 years ago called Elderhood. Louise Erdrich, not Erdrich. Her name escapes me. Anyway, gerontologist, a fabulous, multifaceted book about what it means to grow old in this country. We read that together as a congregation, and man, did the picture come into focus for so many people, and the picture came into focus for us about what it means to be in ministry in a community with so many aging people. So, if I want the congregation to be a learning congregation, I also want my leadership teams to be learning teams. And so each month we begin our meetings with a devotion, a rounds question, and then we have a conversation about some reading that we're doing together. Sometimes it's an article I've found. More recently, I've asked our leadership teams to listen to a podcast. Occasionally, I find a book that I think is really relevant to our work, so we'll commit to 6 or 8 months reading a chapter a month together and talking about it. Here's the thing, and listen, my dear friends. Congregations are unique organizations. Now, many of your leaders are going to bring wisdom from their vocations, from their family experience, from their life experience, and all of that is good and well. But congregations are different. And it serves the mission of the congregation for us as leaders to understand those differences and how we can more wisely and effectively navigate the challenges of this really unique thing that we call a congregation. So I hope you are reading books about congregational mission and dynamics. And so just choose one of your favorites and spend a month on a chapter over a year, or choose your favorite chapter and just do a one-off on that book, or use an article from one of your favorite churchy magazines, or even from one of your favorite business magazines. Now, in the aftermath of the pandemic, we went through a pretty rough time. There was a segment of our congregation that got really mad at me, and that got really mad at some of our leaders. And my leaders just really did not understand what was happening. So some of you know the work of the late Pete Steinke. Maybe 20 years ago, it's kind of an old thing, but Pete Steinke did a video series on dysfunction in the congregation. And I was able to find that video series and purchase it. And so over about 6 months, we spent about 15 or 20 minutes looking at one of those video segments of Pete Steinke's video series about dysfunction in the congregation. And I will tell you, my leaders were mesmerized. And you know why? Because they were experiencing it. And it really captivated them. And the odd thing, I don't know, odd or wonderful thing is that now, even a couple of years later, somebody will randomly say, oh, remember that thing in that Steinke video? That's what's going on right now. So it really captured them, and they really learned from it. Now, sometimes when I talk about colleagues about this reading and studying together, I get this reaction, oh, that would never work in my place. Well, I'm going to encourage you to avoid that kind of self-defeating talk. If you think it's a good idea and you suspect you will get some resistance, then maybe another approach is to step back and say, okay, if I want to start this 12 months or 18 months or 24 months from right now, what are the things that I need to do right now to put it in place so that might be more effectively received? And maybe it's just every so often, you in your pastor's report, or if you are a lay leader in the congregation, you just say, I'd like 5 minutes in this meeting because I read something that I think is really relevant to this congregation's ministry. And just talk about that. Give your third grade book report. Well, it better be better than your third grade book report. And so my hunch is, my experience is, that if you do that occasionally over a period of time, you will get into some good conversations, and people will begin to see the value of spending that time together. When you are learning together, that's relational work. So remember that task team development model? When you are learning together, that's so much task, that's team. You are learning together. And so your relationships are growing and becoming stronger as you do that together. The other reaction that I get is, we have too much business to do to spend our time in these kind of things that are not on the agenda. And I know that's real. But I will tell you without equivocation that in the times that I have paid attention to these things at the beginning of the meeting, the rest of the meeting operates much more efficiently. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but I have found it to be true with very few exceptions. And no, we do not meet for 3 hours. We agree to meet for 90 minutes, and if there is still work to do, we only go on if everyone unanimously agrees to go on. I think that any meeting that goes beyond 90 minutes is counterproductive anyway. Either the conversation is rambling or the agenda was too long. So we spend 30 minutes on team, and we spend 60 minutes on task, and we almost always get it done. And if there are items on the agenda we don't get to, either we decide to extend the meeting or we push them off to the next meeting. Which brings me to our next point. Being clear about expectations, or not. But I think it's good to be clear about expectations. So, my wife and I decide we're going to have hamburgers for dinner, right? And we both know that there's no ground beef in the house. And so I'm usually the one who does the shopping, so she's expecting me to stop by the grocery store and get some ground beef on the way home. And I am not anywhere near a store today, so I'm expecting her to stop by and get some ground beef on her way home, and we both get home and discover that there is no ground beef in the house. You can imagine the reactions to that. It is frustrating, and unmet expectations are a bad situation just waiting to happen. So it's essential in leadership teams that we talk about expectations. I do this in 4 ways. I start with the global. Your congregation is a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation. You are registered with the state of Wisconsin. You have a federal ID. The state of Wisconsin, the Secretary of State, has expectations of boards of directors of not-for-profit groups. And I just think it's really helpful to say that to people. The state expects 2 things of your governing board. They expect you to exercise fiscal responsibility, and they expect you to exercise the vision-making tasks for the organization. Now, that's pretty global, but I think it's important for people to say, this is what our larger society expects of this group: fiscal responsibility and visioning. The next thing I talk about is the congregation's constitution. If you didn't know it, there probably is something in there about your council and their duties. And I have found that really helpful to talk about. People say, oh, I didn't know that's what we were supposed to do. And so every year when we get a new council, we come to that section in the Constitution that lists the responsibilities of the council. Those are expectations, right? Those are expectations that whole faith community has of your leadership group. The next thing we talk about is what the congregation expects of you. So we, again, every year when we get a new council, we spend some time putting expectations of the council. So what might some things that council expects of, or a congregation expects of a council? Say it again. Transparency. Yep. Good. So that goes on the list. Budgeting. They expect you to bring a budget every year, right? They expect you to communicate with the congregation about the things that are happening. Yeah. So you write all those things down. One of the things that, we also go down that list then and make it clear about whether those things that we have written down are reasonable expectations or not, right? So somebody might write down or put down on that list, the congregation expects us never to offend everybody, right? Okay, it's good to write that down, but that's not a reasonable expectation. And so we cross that out, even though it is good to have it written down, because that's what, it's out there. Some people might expect that. So, and then we highlight those things that are reasonable expectations. And so the next thing that I do is I ask council members to talk about what they expect from each other. And usually on that list are things like this. Come to the meetings on time. Come to the meetings prepared. Let the council president or the pastor know if you can't be at the meeting. Fully participate in the conversations. Be present. Offer your opinions. Every council member will make a pledge to the annual giving campaign. Treating each other with respect. Keeping the conversation on task and minimizing extraneous conversation. No parking lot meetings. And this is one that if it's not on the list, I make sure that it gets on the list. When we make a decision, we agree on that decision publicly, even if our personal opinion is against that. We are a leadership group, not leadership individuals. So the magic of laying out expectations is that when you name them, people usually follow them. And when they don't, it makes it much easier to keep dysfunctional behavior from derailing your meetings. If you have agreed that one of your expectations is to treat each other with respect, and you get into this heated conversation and Bob says, that is the stupidest thing that I have ever heard. Now you, or even better, one of your council members can say, Bob, I understand that you have some strong feelings about that, but we agreed to treat each other with respect, and that felt like a disrespectful comment to me. And I also will say the obvious, expectations are not something that you do once and put on the shelf. If you make a list of expectations, and we call that our council covenant, and we bring it out for the first few meetings of the year. We bring it out every month, and then maybe every other month or every third month as time goes on. But we need to be reminded. Treating each other with respect does not mean that we will always agree with each other. In fact, I think it is critical to your leadership teams that they know how to disagree with each other respectfully. I think it's critical for good leadership teams to foster an environment that welcomes disagreement. Now, that may sound like troubled waters that you don't want to venture into, but I would urge you to reconsider. We do not make good decisions when something comes up and everybody says, yeah, I agree. That's not a good decision. I believe fundamentally that our collective wisdom is greater than the wisdom of any single one of us. And so for that collective wisdom to come into play, we have to be able to express differing opinions, and we have to create the environment to express different opinions. And so, one of the things that I might do to foster that is, we've been hearing everybody who is in favor of this. I'm guessing that there might be somebody that has some questions about this. Who has some questions about how this might work or whether this is the wise thing to do? Or, Lenore, we haven't heard from you this evening. Do you have an idea? Do you have any opinions about this? But we have to foster that environment for people to disagree. You know how it works, and I am by nature a people pleaser, and so it is hard for me in a conversation to say something that goes against the grain. And so for a lot of people, that's the way it is. It takes courage to have that comment that goes against the grain. And I understand also the challenge of respectful disagreement in today's cultural environment. We are just not very good at it. If we disagree with somebody, we shout across the fence at those we disagree with and vilify them as if they're agents of Satan. And still, I believe and I try my hardest to practice creating an environment where respectful disagreement can take place. And it's always for the good of the congregation's mission. So recently, our council had a conversation about installing solar panels on our roof. And man, I am all gung-ho for it. And there are a couple of other congregations in Northern Door County that have done that. I talked to a few of the other council members, and they were totally in favor of it. So we brought it to the council, and we were having a conversation, and it was moving forward very quickly. And I will confess to you, it was moving forward too quickly, right? And Mickey, remember Mickey? So Mickey spoke up and said, I don't have an opinion about solar panels one way or another, but I just want to urge a word of caution. And she went on to tell the story about how they had a fight in their condo association about putting solar panels on their clubhouse. And she talked about how rancorous the conversation had become so that neighbors were not talking with each other. There had been mass resignations from the condo association governing board. And all she was saying was, I'm not saying we should or shouldn't do this. All I'm saying is that I think we've got some work to do to go to the congregation and find out what resistance there might be, which was, that was totally wise counsel from her. And so, as a council, we decided to slow down and do exactly what she had said, talk to members of the congregation to hear how they feel about it. And that brings, I think I'm behind, aren't I? Yes, sorry about that. So that brings me to my next point, that in the church, we are engaged in discernment, not decision-making. Let me tell you the difference. Most organizations approach key crossroads by using the language and the process of decision-making. I think that for important matters of mission and ministry, the church doesn't make decisions. It discerns where God might be leading. Now, decisions, we all have to make decisions, right? We are, in the house that I live in, we have 2 furnaces, and they're both about to go, and my wife and I have to make a decision about whether we're going to replace both of them at once, whether we're going to do one at a time, or whether we're just going to try to limp along until one of them goes bad. So that's a decision. Decisions are where the smart people in the room, or the smart people in power, or the people at the top of the pyramid, decide what they're going to do, and then they tell everybody else what to do, and they expect everybody else to follow. Discernment is different. Discernment is markedly slower. It is not top-down, it is bottom-up. It is far less efficient, but I would argue that efficiency is not the most important value in the church. A more important value is our long-term impact and effectiveness in doing God's work in the world. And so to do that, we have to be sensitive to God's leading, to the movement of the Spirit among us. Now take a look again at the early chapters of Acts. When the early church was discerning how the Spirit was leading them to move out into the world, it was not a top-down thing. It was bubbling up from the community. And so when we discern, we are taking time to let the Spirit move us, to listen to each other, to put aside our personal agendas. Could I say that one more time? To put aside our personal agendas and let the forward movement come from the community itself. And so when we discern, we pray together, we listen to the scriptures together, we listen to each other deeply and broadly, believing that it's not just the people on the leadership team who have the wisdom, but every member of the congregation. And I think that's exactly what Paul describes in 1 Corinthians 12 when he says that every member of the body is important, from the little toe to the top of the head and all parts in between. Now, one of the congregations that I was serving owned a house next door to the church. At one time, it had been a parsonage, but the associate pastor had moved away, and when the new associate pastor came, she wanted to own her own home. So this church house next door became a whole variety of things. It became a place for the quilters to meet, a storage area. It became occasionally a classroom, occasionally a council meeting room. But the fact is that because not anybody was living in it, it was showing its wear. And the maintenance issues were getting significant. So we, as a council, we were surprised one month when the building and grounds person came to council and said, we've been talking about that house next door, and we decided that we need to put the money in next year's budget to raise the house. That was a surprise to us. And they were asking for council's endorsement to do that. And so as a council, we said, hang on, let's slow this down a little bit. And what we decided to do was to convene about, I think it was 7 or 8 house meetings. There were 70 or so people who participated in these house meetings. And the one question was, what should we do with the house next door? Well, almost nobody, except the members of the properties team, wanted to raise the house. In fact, out of those house meetings came some marvelously creative ways that we could use that house for mission. And though this happened after I left the congregation, I am proud to say that what happened is the local food pantry needed a place to move to. The congregation made this house available to the food pantry. The food pantry raised the money to renovate the house and agreed to the ongoing maintenance of the house. And so now that house is not just serving the congregation, the food pantry, it is serving the whole community, which never would have happened if we hadn't engaged in that process of discernment. So I love this passage from Colossians. Whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. We have so much for which to be grateful to God. Every Sunday when we gather, a good share of what we do is to give God thanks for all God has done. In fact, the Eucharistic meal itself is a meal of thanksgiving for the redemption that we have through Christ's death and resurrection. Now, if we understand that we are in a relationship with God through Christ, and we give thanks to God for all that we have, it makes sense that we are also in a relationship of gratitude with each other. That gratitude to God overflows in gratitude to each other. Now, maybe you've done the reading. Countless research studies have demonstrated that being grateful is really good for your personal well-being. Try it. It's a practice that I engage in daily in my journaling, ending each day's entry with 3 things that I am grateful for, and sometimes it's just my cup of coffee. But I am convinced that gratitude is also good for congregational well-being. I want to be a part of a congregation that understands the value of gratitude. And when you thank people, something magical happens. It's the same kind of magical thing that happens in a one-on-one relational meeting. When you thank people, they are seen, they are valued, they are affirmed. And so I make gratitude a regular part of my pastoral ministry. On Sunday morning, part of what I do before the service and after the service is I walk around and I thank all the volunteers for their service, whether it's the altar guild, the choir, the music director, the ushers, the communion assistants, whoever it is. Thank you for being here, and thank you for making this happen. I keep a stack of note cards on my desk, and every week, 2 or 3 or sometimes as many as 5 cards get sent out, thinking about something that someone has done that week that has touched me, for which I need to say thank you. Once a year, we take the list of all the people who have given financially to the congregation. I divide that among council members. I give them a script, and we make phone calls to everybody. And the only thing we say in the phone call is, you have supported this congregation financially, and we are so grateful for your support. Thank you for being a part of Shepherd of the Bay. Mostly, it's not a phone conversation. You know how things are today. It almost always goes to voicemail. But I cannot tell you the goodwill that creates for people to hear somebody say, thank you for your giving to this church. And I believe that gratitude is contagious. If I, as a leader in the congregation, engage in the work of saying thank you and make it a priority in my work, it's not long before you will see that leaders begin to thank you, and your leaders will begin to thank others in the congregation, and then pretty soon you see Thanksgiving spread far and wide among your people, and pretty soon you have developed a culture of gratitude. And I will tell you that a culture of gratitude in a congregation feels really good, generates all kinds of goodwill. Finally, evaluate. One of the things that constantly puzzles me about church culture is we spend so little time reflecting on our work. Evaluating. Evaluating simply means to step back and reflect on how it went. What did we learn? What would we do differently if we did it again? How will we do it next time? Because no matter how many times we do something, there are always things to learn and always things that we could do better. When I was the head of staff at a large congregation, we had weekly staff members. One of the things we did early in each staff meeting was to just reflect on Sunday's worship. What went well? What would we do differently if we could do it again? What should we think about doing next year? It was never a chance to call people out or to come down hard on somebody. It was just a chance to say, like, what did we do and how could we do it better next time? And it's not just evaluating events. What I have found to be really helpful in leadership meetings is to end the meeting with just a one-word evaluation. So in our council meetings, for instance, I ask the question, how did you feel about today's meeting? One word. And so we go around and everybody just says one word: grateful, excited, energized, frustrated. And those give a chance, again, it's relational work, but it also gives a chance for people to reflect on what happened. And I might say also that if everybody else was saying the meeting was great, and there's that one guy that says, I was really frustrated, or, gives the word frustrated, I might call Bob or send Bob an email that week and say, I noticed that you said that the meeting was frustrated, and I'm just curious about that. It doesn't need to be any kind of an evaluation. It's just, I'm curious about that. And oftentimes, that will foster a really good conversation. The other thing that happens is if we go around, and a lot of people are saying, too long, overbearing, frustrated, I might start the next meeting by saying, if you remember last month, we felt kind of negative about how things went at our meeting. So I just want to think about what we can do this month to make sure that our meeting is a much better experience for all of us. So you see how that evaluation works. When we have major events, maybe this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. When we have major events, I just think it's really important to take a few moments to step back and evaluate and say what went well, what went wrong, or what would we do differently. We had, this last summer, we had a big party. We burned our mortgage. Woohoo! And we had a potluck. We had an outdoor thing. And, we're a congregation of about 500 or 600 people. It swells in the summertime, obviously. But even for a congregation of 500 or 600 people, we had 250 people come to the potluck that day. And it was just fabulous. Like, people still talk about that. And so in one of our leadership meetings, we had an evaluation, and we talked about what went well. And everybody was talking about, oh my gosh, there was this goodwill. We just loved getting together. And so one of the things that came out of that evaluation is we decided we're not going to wait until we burn our next mortgage. And we decided to have monthly potluck dinners after church, which have gone swimmingly. People just love it. I guess I would have never thought people would like to do this every month, but they do. And if we hadn't taken the chance to evaluate, we probably never would have done that. So, thank you. I hope these brief reflections offer some inspiration and plant some seeds for how you might more effectively and with more joy and satisfaction and effectiveness develop lay leadership in your congregation or organization. I want to make it clear that I don't stand in front of you as someone who has all the answers. I've been doing this work for a long time, and I've learned a few things along the way. And every day I'm learning how to be better at my work. And honestly, I wish that I had the chance to sit across the table from every one of you, because I'm confident that there is just as much that I could learn from you. And so I just want to close by saying thank you for being here, for being an attentive group. You know, the work that we do as leaders in the church is often hard, and it often seems like your work goes unnoticed and unappreciated. But I want to tell you that I am grateful for the work that you do. You know, every day you answer the call to proclaim the love of God in Christ by what you do and what you say and how you are. What you do is for the sake of God's big intentions for all people and for the good world that God has created. And you and your congregation are the very people that God has promised to work through. And I am so grateful for that. You know, our reading in our church on Sunday was the choosing of the replacement for Judas. His name was Matthias. Good for you, A+. And we never hear from Matthias again. But we don't need to, because we know that he was called to do the work. And though he may have done it anonymously, he did the work. And so you are doing the work. And I say thank you. God bless you in your work. May the Spirit empower you and bring you joy. We're going to spend a few minutes on questions here, but before I do that, I want to give you my contact information. If you want to have any questions or want to pursue any of these things a little further, I am open to a one-off phone or Zoom conversation. And so there you go. Questions? Hi, Casey. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. You mentioned with councils having the right people and people that are qualified for leadership. For those of us maybe like me who's in intentional interim ministry, or for people starting out at calls with some entrenched council members, have you had conversations with people who are already on council that maybe this isn't the best fit for them, and how have those conversations gone?
Yeah, so that's a hard conversation, right? Especially for people who find a good share of their identity in being congregational leaders. And I guess the most important thing that I would say about that is developing lay leadership in a congregation is not something that you do between now and August, right? In some places, it is a long-term project. When I got to the council, when I got to my call at Shepherd of the Bay, it was 7 years ago. There were clearly some people on the council who were not cut out to be congregational leaders. And so for us, we just let term limits run their course and make sure that when we get new people on council, they are people who do play well with others, people who have a passion for the ministry. And, I give God thanks regularly for this gift that we call term limits, right? Yes.
Something that you didn't really touch on, but how do you develop youth leadership, young adult leadership for your teens, young adults? Do you guys have something in place? Do you have a mentoring program? Any ideas on that topic? Because
Yeah, actually, I appreciate that question. We do not at Shepherd of the Bay, and part of the reason we have so few youth. In the congregation that I came from, Faith in Glen Ellen, Illinois, we had a very robust youth ministry. And in fact, the youth minister was a presenter here last year. And I think if you look on the Siebert website, you might find her presentation. And I'm sure it was awesome about that very thing. Her name is Jen Bradbury.
What is your experience with the mutual ministry model? I have found it to be very helpful.
Yeah, so I think that is a great question. So in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, a congregation is constitutionally mandated to have a leadership group called the mutual ministry, which is sort of like, but not exactly, a personnel committee. And in some places, I think they operate more as a personnel committee. I don't think that's the most helpful model for it. I think the more helpful model is for each member of the staff to have a lay leader that they can confide in, and there is a firewall between that conversation and the sort of evaluation conversation, that there needs to be somebody in the congregation that called and hired leaders can relate to. So if that's the way the mutual ministry team is set up, I'm fully in favor of it. I think mutual ministry as a personnel committee can go south kind of quickly.
What is the name of the book about growing old in the U.S.?
It's called Elderhood. And thank you. There's a novelist, Louise Erdrich, and she's the one that got stuck in my head. Yes, Louise Aronson. Fabulous, fabulous book. I would highly recommend it. Please.
First of all, thank you so much for your presentation today.
Thank you for being here.
The question that I have kind of related to the gentleman there. I was just thinking about what our keynote speaker said, that we're living in an age of authenticity. People look inward to discover and express their true identity apart from organizations. There is a lot of organizational models within the Lutheran Church for doing things. And we were told this morning about that FX movement. People are coming in who have not been churched,
Right.
or probably were churched and walked away because of whatever. People from different cultures, we're becoming more of a global community, even in rural counties. How do you integrate cultural appropriation in your leadership and representation? And for example, like in Ellison Bay, you probably don't have a lot of young people, maybe a lot of retired people.
Yes.
But still, that does not take away the necessity of having the voice of somebody who is, I'm just gonna say in quotes, young or younger, or within that age of authenticity, even if you don't have a great representation, but at least making sure that your council represents. So there is a cultural component to it. Migrant workers going up north who need to be, they probably don't speak English, maybe. And then making sure that this age of accountability, because they're the future, how
Right.
do we integrate those?
Yeah. Well, they're not just the future, they are the present of the church too, right? Yeah, they are here. Yeah. So, part of the answer to that is in what I said much earlier about having an eagle eye focus on leaders. And so you're looking around not just at the usual suspects, but if there aren't youthful people in your leadership team, you're looking around to see who there is that could be trained, that could be brought along. I do have a couple of people, in fact, I think Mickey is one of them, who did not spend much of her adult life connected to the church, and she and her husband found their way back to the church in retirement. And so there was some training, some teaching, some modeling, some discipling that needed to go on in order for her to become, I think, the effective leader that she is. But it's looking around, scanning the landscape to see who is available. And if, I don't isolate my one-on-one meetings to people that I think are leadership material. I have one-on-one meetings with a much broader segment of the congregation. But having said that, I'm also always on the lookout for people that I think have gifts. And it may very well be that I ask someone for a one-on-one relational meeting, but I have no expectation they're going to be a leader, and I'm sort of blown away in the conversation. Oh, wow, this person is going to be a leader. Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Thank you so very much for being here. Thank you for being here today in the conference and for this time. Thank you.